All right. So this might be a long video. I think this is actually the first video on this channel, so it's gonna be kind of exciting. I've not done something like this before, but we'll see how this goes. This is not off a script or anything. This is just I've created a ranking system, power ranking all the teams in the VCT, and this video is just gonna be me explaining my thoughts and just how the thing is going to look until the end of the season. I did do this a bit late, so there has been 4 games played in China, but hopefully, and there's been some changes to the ratings due to those games, as these ratings are sort of going to be changing as the games goes on. But yeah. So, how does this work then? First off, every single team will get a rating between 0 and 113. Basically, why I've chosen 113 is because it's a prime number, which just means you can't divide it by basically anything, which is a good thing to me because that means that it's difficult to conceptualize what every single score means if you're trying to give it a fair score, which I think is a good thing because that means that there won't be as much frequency of being like, oh yeah, that team's a 7 or that team's an 8. Like the sort of numbers that are quite common won't be as common here because we have a completely different scale that nobody's really used to think about. So therefore, every single team gets a rating between 0 and 113. Because it's the start of the season, it's going to be a bit different, as these are obviously going to be preseason rankings, except for these 4 games that have been played in China. And basically, what I've tried to do is just look at the players and give each player a rating, and this rating is from 1 to 10. And then added a chemistry rating, which is kind of like a bit of a mix between coaching staff, how the players get along, language barriers, and a bunch of these stuffs that will go into if a team meshes well together or not. Obviously, I can't know everything, but this is just my thoughts on it, and I will go through a bit more. And that basically is just like an extra rating on top of the player ratings, and it just adds a bit. So basically, if you get for example, if you get a 0, so the most you can get without any chemistry is just a straight 100. Well, chemistry can add more than that, up to 113. So you can add an extra 13 points. So if you get a 10 in chemistry, that's going to be an extra 13. And 9 is going to be 9 times like 1.3, and so on and so forth, basically. So I'm going to give, in this video, how I'm going to set it up is first I'm going to give each individual team a rating, and each player a rating as well, which is then going to result in the rating of the team. Keep in mind, these ratings will be, I will say this, I am a bit more on the reserved side with new rosters, and that's kind of where the chemistry rating comes in, but also a lot of tier 2 players will be on the lower side, and there are some tier 2 players that I've put really highly, and then I'll express why that is, but there's but in general, I will be very reserved with and not take many, let's say, huge risks when it comes to the ratings. But yeah, so I'll first individually rate every single team, and then so I'll do one region at a time, and then by the end, when I've done every single team in that region, I'll show you a regional ranking of every single team and what rating they have. All right, so let's start with China. So I'm gonna do them in the order which they start, so the date order. So it's going to be China, then it's going to be EMEA, Americas, Pacific. So starting off with all gamers, as I'm going to do the teams in alphabetical order. So all gamers, I will say, is probably the worst team in the entire region right now. I think just the entire thing of them having a bunch of players. Obviously, they have their main roster with DLB, Monk, LSN, Nizhao, and Kira. But overall, they just don't have a lot of team chemistry in my mind, because there's a lot that has happened with this team, and in general, just having a new coach, which they got in January. They have a somewhat newly put together team, and no player is really set in stone on the roster. It means it's very. I feel like that's sort of why this team chemistry rating is at a 5. When it comes to player rating, I think DELB joined in January 2024. He played for the entirety of last year for AG. AG last year was, let's just say, they weren't the best team, but they weren't really that bad. And a big reason as to why they weren't that bad was DLB, as he looked insane on that sort of Senti initiate role. When it comes to the rest of the team, I mean, overall, I'd say this team is just kind of all over the place. Like, they have Nizhao, who's a very experienced player, but obviously is new to this roster. Got dropped by DRG, which, if you know which team DRG are, they were a pretty decent Chinese team last year, but they weren't like amazing in any way. I think Nizhao is still an okay player, though. Like, he's definitely not one of the worst players in the league, but he's never really been the one to outperform everybody. He's always been kind of that consistent support player and not much more. I just think in general, though, with this team, there's just not much star power. Like, we have Kira as well, who joined in October of 2024, basically hasn't played any games except for the China kickoff, and he's also like a really new player. Like, the only thing I have to go off from Monk is a bit of preseason and some Ascension games, and or not Monk, Kira, sorry. But from what I've seen, he's looked pretty good, so that's why he got a 7 right now. Then it comes to a player like LSN, who I've just given a 4, because I simply just didn't know what to give this guy, because he has not had a before the game they played against Nova, they just simply have not played a single game. And just so you know, these player ratings will not change over the course of the season. It's just the team ratings, and they're mostly just to get an estimate for how good, for like a start off team rating that you then can use to change everything. So it literally means nothing. It's just kind of. So they also, in general, because of that simple reasoning, they will also be kind of close. So they will genuinely, most teams will just be between like a 70 and like a 100, and there will genuinely not be many lower or higher than that, just simply because there's a lot of uncertainties at the start of the season, and in general, it's very difficult to know how a team will play. So therefore, they will be kind of close together, although obviously you can say that some teams will be better than others pretty confidently. But yeah, overall though, like, this team, we have Monk as well, who, well, he joined this team in January 2024. He played last year for them, and like, he was decent and nothing more, I'd say. He was like good enough. He was like, you know. I just feel that this team overall just has nothing really going for it to make me excited for this team whatsoever. And well, it didn't help that they lost 2-0 to Nova, another team which I will say I have them higher now, and I think I've been a bit too harsh on them, as I do feel like they had a good offseason. And yes, I do account for the offseason slightly in this, but I also just think All Gamers was just a very easy matchup for them to start off. which is why also, as you see here, the rating has dropped quite drastically to a 61 already after one game. So yeah, the ratings won't drop and change as drastically over time as the ratings gets more equalized, but right now in the beginning, when ratings are very unknown, the ratings will go up and down quite a lot, especially on kickoff. Now we're going to BiliBili Gaming, which is a pretty big step up, I'd say. I will say overall, the addition they make of like Russia is very difficult for me to say anything about. But luckily they did play some off-season event, and for the most part in those events, I think Russia, or however you want to say it, he looked solid, you know. He wasn't like an incredibly standout-ish player, but he looked good. And I think overall this BiliBili team is just like going to be pretty good. Like they have YC, K-Knight, Neff. They have like a core here. With a coach that has coached in some Korean challengers, and sure, they got a new coach for this year, or he's coached for Gen.G, and since March has coached this team, and they've always been like pretty decent, and I don't think that would really change this year. I think BiliBili would be pretty decent. But yeah, that's why they're around like an 82 here. It's gonna be interesting with the game that comes up. I think it actually is in 2 days when they play Shilai, because that's a team where it's the Ascended team, and they just beat Wolves 2-0. We're gonna come into that a bit later. But Shilai in general, I just have quite high expectations for, because how they looked in Ascension was just kind of something we haven't even seen in Tier 1, except for maybe a couple teams. But yeah, moving on from BiliBili, we now have EDG, which is probably going to be the fastest one to go through. I do think nobody has always been... I wouldn't say a weakness to this team, but I feel like that's kind of what you have to look at it as. As I do think he is sort of a player that just is a bit of a wild card. You don't really know what to do with him. And I've always said that he's the worst player on this team. I think Kangkang Shichu Smoggy, which the 10 out of 10 score is basically just... It means that you're competing for the best in the world in your role. And I think Chichu, Smoggy, and Kangkang this year has made very good reasoning as to why they would be the best in their role. And I think Simon was solid. He's a solid support player. I do think he might increase over time. I think for me, he's looking like somebody like, if they can continue to be good, he's looking something similar to like an Ethan, which Ethan, as you will see later when we talk about Americas more, is going to be... You'll see that he's slightly better than Simon right now. I just feel like, sure, he looked really good in Champs, and but he's still... It's a very small sample size for what we have seen from him. Coming up now is FPX, which is probably one of those teams where it's a bit on the side of what can you really expect from this team, because we know that there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of good things. Like we have the core of Berlin, Autumn, Life, and Ayang. Yosemite joined from BiliBili. And I mean, BiliBili looked solid in like stage 2. They really did. And I don't know if a big part of that was Yosemite, but he looked pretty solid. And I think he is like an okay player, but obviously he's not like... I wouldn't say he's like an amazing pickup for this FPX roster. As you see, I gave him a 6. But I just think overall the rest of this roster is pretty solid. And the only reason this is not really a 10 in the team chemistry is just because one newly added player, and then they've had the same coach for a long time, and I just think overall this team just has never really gotten very like well put together in a way. They've always been a bit all over the place. And that is the thing that will, for me at least, tank it a bit in terms of team chemistry. But yeah, moving on, we have Gen.G, which they've played a game, they lost to DRG. And honestly, like, except for that Haven, like, this team, they just did not look good. And the only reason they won Haven was because of Stu and Sion, which, I mean, Sion I put pretty low here, considering how well he played. You'd think I would put him higher. In that first game, he played really well. But I just think, for me, personally, we have seen very little of Sion. Like, we saw him a bit in Stage 2 last year. I do think that he has the potential to be a top player for this team, and I think that he is a great player to have on this Gen.G roster. I just think that overall the rest of the roster is just not very good. Like, Mr. Connie is just straight up bad. Like, I don't know why they picked him up. I get that he played on Chile, and you know, he was okay on Chile, but like, he got kind of carried on that team. Like, he wasn't. Let's be completely honest here. Mr. Connie got kind of carried on that team. While he still had solid numbers, that's just what happens when you play on a team that literally just dominate, like Chile did for large parts of that Ascension run. So I don't really know why they added Mr. Connie, although you see my rating is actually somewhat high on him, just because I do feel like there could be something there, maybe. But then, I mean, you have Baby Blue, who played a bit in 2023 Ascension, like in the Heritability Act 3. Like, it's just an oddball of a player to add, and I just don't really know what he will add to this team, which is why he's so low. And then there's Chikura, who, well, he played for them last year. Was he good? Not really. I wouldn't say he was good, but he was not like super bad either. Like, he's just like that, like, pretty, like, slightly below average, maybe, like, still like okay player to have on your roster. So this roster, once again, is just kind of underwhelming. I feel like they need to add more pieces to this roster, just because, like, Sion is a great piece to, like, have for the future. Stu is incredible. Mr. Connie, I feel like, can be good, but they just have, like, pieces which are just not good enough for a roster like this. And after the game, I mean, I put them down a bit. Although DRG is a good team, like, how those two maps they lost looked was just not where I thought this team would be. I thought this team would be able to, like, at least compete on a better level, but it just simply couldn't. And DRG just destroyed them on two maps. And sure, they kept it close on one, but honestly, that didn't really matter to me because they just got absolutely obliterated on the other two. And then we have Nova, which Nova Esports was the team that beat All Gamers, and I put these teams at around the same level to start off, because I just thought there was a lot of positives going into this season for Nova, with a pretty good Superb Cup. They looked pretty decent, and I mean, they have some really solid players, but I just think a player like I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it, but the guy, he's just bad, and the rest of the team is, like, decent, but it's just, I don't know what to think about this team. And I mean, when they played AG, they just showed that they were, like, just straight up, like, so much better, and that's why they've gone up place to 79 for me. And yeah, I think this team has potential. I just think they need to get rid of this guy. This guy's just not good. Like, he's just not performing ever. I don't care if he's and I don't care if he is, like, IGLing or something. Like, he's just not good. Like, yes, he's IGLing, sure, but, like, he's just not, like, I don't feel like he's that good of an IGL either. Moving on, we have Trace Esports, which is one of the teams that haven't played yet. because they were really good last year, and I think they're going to be really good this year as well. I mean, they added Bianc last year from BiliBili. He's really good, as you see, but I would say is the worst player. Otherwise, I mean, they didn't change the roster. I'm pretty sure they didn't make any roster moves. And this team is just good. Team chemistry 10, because like this team has looked good and they didn't really change much. So I was just like, all right, that's like probably as little abrupt of a start to the season you can have. Just a good team overall. Yeah, they're going to be good this year. Obviously nowhere close to Gen.G, but that's a pretty high bar to set, as Gen.G literally won champs. But you know, moving on, we have Titan Esports Club, which was a team that I really want to do well. They beat TYLOO 2-0 in a pretty close game. That be it, I feel like it could have gone either way. Like both maps went to 23 or 24 rounds. But I just feel like this team just has like a lot of like nice pieces. Like they added Haodong, which is going to be a solid piece for them. I mean, they have RB since before, who is a great player. I mean, they have Black on their team. I think that's how you say his name, who's okay. Dynamite have really not played a lot, but he's kind of a rookie, and when he played, so there's not very unknowns on him, and that's kind of why he is as low as he is. And then when it comes to Abo, I mean, he's the one player that they kept from last year, and he's just good. He's pretty decent. Like, nothing more than that. He's pretty decent. He's a pretty good player. And combined with RB, I just hope that RB can get a good roster around him. And, well, after that last win against TYLOO, it looked pretty decent. So maybe we'll see if the roster is good. As you see, the rating went up by 1. As I do have TYLOO on a pretty close rating to them, as we see next. They started off at a 76. Meanwhile, Titan Esports Club started at a 77, so I thought they were a little bit better, which some might argue that you saw here last game as well. But, well, I just took it down to 75, as I do feel like they still lost it in 2 maps, and it looked pretty controlled overall. And I think this TYLOO team just has, like, 2 pretty major, like, flaws in 5CM and Aaron. I just think the rest of the team is pretty stacked. It's just they have just 2 pretty bad players. And overall, I just think this team is just odd. Just like in general, just odd. I don't really know what to think about it. They had a new coach, some new players. Like, this team is just weird to me. And that's why it's this low. And it's one of the worst team in China. Moving on, we have Wolves Esports, which is the team that Sheila played. And this is actually one of those teams that I was pretty high on. I gave them a 90. They are actually close to Trace at the start of the season. I think Sufat BB and Ju is a really solid player. I think Juka was insane last year. Some might look at this, if you watched China, and be like, why the fuck is Juka that high and not somebody like Spring? Well, I just think that Juka is just ridiculous. Like, Juka was ridiculous last year. Like, he was one of the best players in all of China. And sure, some might sit here and be like, well, Spring was also that. Spring was so good for them as well. Which I would say fair enough. I just felt like Juka was just on another level last year. It was just ridiculous. And that's why I gave him a 9 here. Lysor is always going to be a good player to have on your roster. And then Juicy is like an exciting prospect that finally gets to get into tier 1 after just being too young for a long period of time. And now finally he gets his chance, and he gets it with Wolves. But honestly, this first game, I did put them pretty highly because they kept a lot of their roster the same, as they did play well last year. And they did add a new coach in October, but other than that, they kept it pretty much the same and just added an exciting new rookie. I do feel like in the first game against Shilai, though, and we're going to come to Shilai's rating later, just felt kind of disappointing. Because I felt like this team would at least be able to hold it competitive with Chile. Like felt like this team would be good, but I felt like when you looked at the game, it was genuinely just mechanics that carried them to get any rounds in these games. Like Chile just looked better, and then Wolves managed to get like 11 and 9 rounds on those two maps because they just had insane aim rounds from like their teammates. Which is why I've actually decided to just put Wolves down quite a lot and just keep Sheila the same, because I feel like Sheila looked exactly as good as I thought they would. Usually the Wolves look worse. Yeah, moving on. Now we have DRG, who I think they have Vukashu. They have a team that looks okay, decently good enough. I just don't really know much about their coaching staff, and in general, I just think it's a bit of a weird case of a team. And while I do think they are going to be good, I do think Vukashu is just like straight up the best player on this team, and I don't think it's even close. Spirit Z1 could potentially be a player that could stir that up. I think he has really good potential and looked really good in Ascension last year, but other than that, this team just kind of looks like it has a bit of a problem with just having kind of like a crew problem for a long time, where they just had like a Kesnid and friends basically with Wukashu here. Moving on to but yeah, after that first game, I think they looked pretty decent, so I just put them up to an 83. And Shilai, I mean, I think they just straight up made upgrades. I think, especially looking at that first game, I feel like every single doubt we had on this team just kind of got lost for me, because I feel like I was pretty high on Coconut after, although his Oblivion Force went down and out pretty just instantly in Pacific Ascension. I think he just kind of just made that the only reason that team ever really made any sort of, like, in that Taiwan Hong Kong league, like the only reason that team was really that good in the first place was Coconut big part of. And I think Viva is just a great addition. Like, I think Viva is just like, I mean, if you were gonna steal any player from that JDG roster that wasn't Stu, it's Viva. Like, any day of the week. Like, obviously, like, Stu is ridiculous, but Viva was on that same level, especially in terms of KD. But he was playing Sova, Gecko, and Viper. Like, he's just a ridiculously good player. I just feel like the reason he isn't higher than an 8 is just because he isn't as proven. And in general, I can't really put this team super highly in terms of player ratings, as a lot of these players have still not proven anything at the tier 1 level. But still, this team, I've put them at a 90. I think if this team does not make an event in the China, especially considering they're from the China region, that's going to be a disappointment for them, pretty big. So overall, this is what it looks like currently with the China rankings. We have EDG, Trace, followed by XOG, FPX, Wolves, DRG, BLG, Nova, Tech, TYLOO, JDG, and All Gamers. I might need to cut some things out here. We'll see, because this is already half an hour and we have 3 readers left to go. But we'll see. Moving on, we now have EMEA, and we're going to start with BBL. Which BBL, they have a stand-in for this kickoff tournament as what we think is, or what we know is going to be Shiwa. is getting, they brought in a stand-in as Shiva has, I think he hasn't gotten a visa, so Vac is going to play instead. I think Shiva is fine. I think this team is just not going to be very good this year. Because I just don't see the chemistry working, as they just completely went away from Turkish teams here in BBL. And just got like a mediocre team just put together. It just felt like it just took random players from random rosters that looked decent and then just put them in a roster, and I don't think it's going to work. But yeah, for kickoff, I think with the stand-in back, they're not going to look particularly good. I think, as we see here with the stand-in, I think they're not going to be... They're probably going to go out in 2 in kickoff. If we're going to be completely honest, this team is not going to be good for kickoff. I'm just on that train. Moving on, we have FNATIC, where, I mean, I feel like it's pretty obvious to say that Alpha and Chronicle are 10 out of 10 players here. I feel like that's like the biggest thing you can say. I have put Boaster at a 7. I do think he can improve, and I think at times Boaster can easily be a 9. I don't think he's got the raw aim and raw skill to be a 10 out of 10 player, like one of the best IGLs in the world. But I do think his calling is some of the best in the world. I just feel like his mechanics are not good enough as to where I would consider him one of the best IGLs in the world. But overall, I think Kayak is going to be decent. I don't think he's going to be remotely close to Darke, but I think he's going to be decent. And I feel like another thing that kind of makes this team chemistry go down, the only real thing that makes it go down for me, is just what's going on with Leo. Like, that's the entire thing here. Crashies, I think he's going to be good. I think he fits this team really well. But, like, what's going on with Leo? That's just my entire question. Like, what is happening with Leo? Like, I feel like this team will just never be able to live up to what they can be unless this Leo situation gets sorted out in some way. As I do feel like Leo is just an irreplaceable player, and even if he ends up not playing anymore and retiring or something, I just think him being like this and not playing for the roster and being on and off and them trying to get him to play, him not being able to play, so on and so forth, kind of hurts the team quite heavily. I still think this roster is going to be good, though, which is why it's at 96. I think this is going to be one of the better rosters in the EMEA, no matter what this year, no matter what happens. Moving on, we now have footballists or foot esports, which I thought the change from Cena to Zeus was great. I think Mr. Falling is still a good enough player to stay on this roster. I just think Krax has met his end. I don't know. I just don't think he's good enough to be on a top roster like this. I think he's not versatile enough, although he did show a bit more versatility this year. I just think he's just not good enough for a roster like this, and that's why this roster can't really be super duper high for me. And I don't really see them winning anything with this roster. So yeah, quick and easy. Moving on, GIANTX. This is a roster that I'm kind of excited for. I think Cloud has always been a fantastic player. I think there could be arguments made that he would be a 9. I don't think 10 is anywhere close, but I think arguments could be made that Cloud should be a 9 here. But I just think this team is going to be really interesting to watch this year, because I feel like Westside is a really interesting rookie that has looked good what he's played. Runner was pretty solid on Vitality last year, maybe getting some new scenery, maybe getting some more light to shine in. Could be good for him. Tomashi, I mean, he was great last year. I think if he just improves a bit, he can be like a good player. Same with Purple. I think this team could genuinely surprise people this year. And I think it's an exciting roster compared to what we've seen from Giants before, where I just feel like it's a bunch of old players that they're trying to come up with something. I actually feel excited watching this roster, as I do feel like Cloud, although he's obviously on the older side of these players, have like a roster around him, which he can kind of mentor and kind of make into his own, hopefully. And I really actually like what GIANTX has done with the roster. But obviously, I don't think they're gonna be. I don't think you can say that they're gonna be guaranteed pretty good, which is why they're pretty low, sitting at an 80. Moving on now, we have Karmine Corp, which adding Sadak I think is great in terms of player quality. Like Sadak is a fantastic player, but I'm just confused at what this roster really wants to be, because like they kept Martine, which was arguably their worst player. Then they added Sugetsu, which is insane. They added Elite, which is great. Then they just added a rookie in Aves, and then just added one of the best IGLs in the entire world. And then they have Eng and Zeish, one of the best coaching duos in the entire world as well. And I'm just confused what this team wants, because it feels very all over the place with what they've added. And I don't really know if this team is going to be good or not, but they really could be. Like, this team has the pieces to be good. I just don't. I'm just very, very like indifferent on them in general. Moving on, we have Navi, who probably is one of the teams which I am very low on. I feel like a lot of people are not as low on Navi because it's Navi, but I've never liked Angel. I think Angel at this point is just old. He's not good. His calling is questionable. He does things that just no player should be allowed to do. Shao is obviously going to be good. I think Hero is going to be good, but then you add two rookies to it with Angel, who I just think is a liability no matter what. And I just don't see this roster being particularly good this year. They might still be decent because it's still Navi, as I said, and that's usually why people put them higher than I feel like they should. But I honestly just don't see it with this Navi roster. Moving on, we have what I would consider the best team coming into this year. Maybe you could argue for someone else, but currently, I just think Team Heretics is the best team coming into this year. No, made no changes. Wood, Ree, and Gen.G, all three top players in the world. Mini Boo, amazing players as well. Like, this team is just incredible. Like, I'd say, okay, it's not Prime FNATIC incredible, but this team is just like ridiculously good. Like, this team is so good. And with Nilsinho and Weber, probably arguably the best coaching duo in the entirety of EMEA, if not the entire world right now. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would consider Nilsinho coach of this year. Like, he's that good. And yeah, this team is just gonna be good again. I don't see how they wouldn't be. So yeah. Moving on, we have Koi, which I'm not too up on Koi, but I'm not too down either. I feel like Flya is one of those players where it's like he is kind of unproven, but he's also kind of proven. Like, he's shown that he's good in tier 2, but also at the same as an IGL as well. But I just feel like he's not proven it enough as to where I feel like he's good enough for tier 1. Grubinho was great last year. Shados is Shados. And Philo and Soulcast are like solid players. And there's really not much more you can say about this team. It's not a very exciting roster whatsoever, in my opinion. I think adding Gorilla as your head coach was a pretty good move. And overall, this team is decent. Don't see them being like a big threat, but they could be fighting for playoffs, basically. Moving on now, we have Team Liquid. Which, well, Team Liquid, I will say I don't really like what they did. Although I think I do like Patty and Kamik. I think Camo was not very good last year. Kiko is still a player I feel like is very overrated. Nats is obviously going to be good, but other than that, I just see this roster as being the middest of mids. Like, this roster is just not very good. So yeah, moving on, we have probably the most exciting roster coming into this year in Team Vitality. Except for maybe NRG, this is probably the most exciting roster coming into this year. As we have Safe, who's one of the best players in the world. Trex, one of the best players in the world. Durka, one of the best players in the world. Les, one of the best players in the world. With kicks. The only reason this team is not higher than what it is practically just how is it gonna work with less Safe. Like, I feel like there might be some clashing personalities, and like Les is only ever communicated in Portuguese. How is that gonna work? He's gonna switch regions. Like, there's quite a lot that could go wrong with this team. Also, Safe being new on IGL, but also at the same time, this team is just straight up like super team. Like, it's just straight up a super team, and I don't think anybody can deny that. After that, we have Gentlemates, which I think the players they added were solid. I think the tier 2 talent was okay. Like, nothing more than okay. I think Sipon was a good addition. I think it was a good decision to keep Kadavra. I just don't really understand why you wouldn't make another French roster. I just really do not get that whatsoever. Obviously with new head coach as well. I just don't see this team being very good this year whatsoever. There's really only one team that I'm gonna put below it, and it's sadly the other Ascension team. Although this is actually the only region where I have the two Ascension team at the bottom. I do just think Apeks is just not gonna be very good this year. And even if they are, I don't even know anymore what this team is gonna look like for this year. I'll put Fluorescent as a 4. I think Fluorescent was a great signing. It's just very difficult to predict if she's gonna be good or not. Malsey is solid, Avova is solid, Hype is solid. We all know that. But that is about this 5th player that nobody knows who he is, and they're gonna stand in with Odorous, and it's chaos right now in this roster. And already with this Bytonox guy, which is like a Turkish tier 2 talent, this team is not looking very good. And I don't even know what to give them for this preseason, but yeah, they're just not good. And yeah, I just realized, yeah, this should not be on Gentlemates, this should be on BBL, by the way. This BBL is the team that has a stand-in and not Gentlemates. Moving on to Americas now, and we start off with 100 Thieves, which is a roster that I've always liked. I've always liked this 100 Thieves roster. I will say they look a bit worse than last year. I've always liked this 100 Thieves roster with everything except one thing, and that is that I do think that Asuna is still extremely overrated. I do think he's a decently okay flex player, but like, he's just not good enough to be fighting for trophies at this point. Like, they have Cryocells, Boostio, and EU who EU I even argued for giving a 10 here. Like, this team is genuinely so good. Genuinely so good. And obviously Sander will be a downgrade from Bang. But overall, this team is just good. This team is just gonna be good this year. I don't see a way where they're not good this year. Moving on to Cloud9. This is probably the one roster where I wanted to put them lower than what I did. Because although Oxy is a 10 out of 10 player, he is one of the best players in the world. Just how this roster has handled the preseason, Mitch is not very good. I do not understand how Seppa is still on this team. Vic and Nat are fine. I just think, in general, this roster has just been chaos everywhere. And although I gave the team chemistry a 7, I wanted to give it much worse so badly, just because you never know. This roster is just chaos everywhere. And honestly, I think this is going to be one of America's worst teams this year if they continue like they are. But you never know, because Cloud9 always managed to come up with something. Somehow. Moving on to EG. This is a roster which I can't really give a high score to, because I just think there's too many uncertainties here, but I could see this team being good. Oh, fuck. I still have Sim here. Either way, I don't think IC is particularly much better. Maybe I would have given IC a 7, and this team would have been slightly better. I've just not updated it then. I do think IC is decent. I just don't think he's super good, but I could see him improving. Like, I think Superman had a really good year last year. I think Derek really showed that he can still be a good player. I just don't think Nature is particularly good. But I think IC and Ye really can prove themselves this year. And if they do, this EG team could genuinely be pretty scary. But I can't for the life of me give this team any high ratings, so it's just gonna be this for now. Moving on to Furia. This Furia roster is overall pretty solid. I think he and Muzera are both gonna be really good. I think Havoc is solid, Khalil is solid. I just have doubts in Sao and Rafa. I just do. Overall, I think this roster is okay. Best. I don't think they're gonna do much damage whatsoever, though. Moving on to crew now. I think this roster is just straight up is finally at a point where I'm gonna say that Kessness is not the best player. I mean, I would say it was the same last year with Shy, but now they have both Shy and Mazzino, who I would say are better than Kessnet, just on a player base level. But yeah, Kessnet, Mazzino, Shy is an insane trio. And Melser and Adverse are pretty decent. I think this roster is going to be pretty good. I think it's good to get Melser off of that IGL role. And I think Adverso is a pretty decent IGL as well. Moving on to Leviatan, I actually have them at the same rating here. As well, I do feel like you could make an argument for both King and Com to be a 10. I just don't really see it. Even Tex being an 8, I could see. But overall, I just think they lost so much when they lost Aspas, man. Like, this team lost... Not only, by the way, did they lose Aspas, they also lost Mazzino, who was just having a career year last year. And, like, this team wasn't even, like, winning events whatsoever either. This team was, like, sure, they were good, but they were not, like, win event type good for any part of the year. And I just think Natank and Demon 1 is just downgrades. It could potentially be good, but I'm just not seeing this as being better whatsoever from last year. Loud, I'm pretty low on. I think people are overrating DDC quite heavily. I think he was pretty decent when he was in tier 1. He was pretty decent when he was in tier 2. That's about where you're going to get from him. I think as a duelist, he's not particularly good. I think Vinny could be an interesting ad, but I just don't see it. Pancada, Tweez, and Kaunzine is going to be good. As always, I just don't see this team being very good in general. Moving on to MIBR, we have a roster which I really rate. I think this roster basically just have Noswer and Aspas, who are fantastic players. And then just added Zenom and Cortesia, the two best Brazilian players in all of Brazilian Ascension last year. And then Arzin is just like an okay player. I just think this team is going to be good, and there's not much more to say about it. And with Fraud as the head coach as well, I mean, this team is just has a good coaching staff with Aspas and a bunch of just either phenoms or Noswer and Artson. Like, it's just this team is just gonna be. I just think this team is just gonna be good. Like, I don't see a world where this team is not good. Like, it's just how it is. Moving on to NRG, which I think is the second or maybe even first most excited team, although not in the same way that Vitality is, as I wouldn't consider this a super team. As they basically just added 2 youngsters and Bonker as a coach. And a lot of people will look at that 10 in team chemistry and be like, how the fuck are you telling me that they added 2 youngsters to a roster and changed up a lot of the core of this roster with a new duelist and a new initiator and a new coach, and you're still giving them 10 in team chemistry? It's just because Bonker and Verno together is just such a smart way to go around this, and Bonker overall is just such a good coach. And with how they've looked in the preseason, I just don't see how this team is bad whatsoever. And I think that this team has already shown that Bonker can handle this team and that this team will have good chemistry just overall. I think this team is just going to be one of the better teams in NA, if not the world, this year. Which is why I'm giving it them a 97 here. Moving on to Sentinels, I do think that while it's not a downgrade for Sentinels, I do still believe, truly and surely, I do believe that it was at most a side grade. I do think it was mostly a side grade, although some might argue it's a slight downgrade. I mean, keeping everything the same otherwise is just good. It's just gonna be interesting to see how good this roster is gonna be able to be. And also, just in general, I don't think Sentinels was that good of a roster last year. Although they won an international, like after that point, they were kind of shaky. Then we move on to America's Best Team. I mean, hot take probably here. I think Valorant is just the best player on this team, and I don't think it's particularly close. I think Jogaba could make a case for it this year, but overall, this team is just solid throughout everywhere, and adding Jogama instead of IC is just going to make this team even better in every single way possible. And maybe they'll even win an event this year, and Josh RT as coach. It's just like, this team is just... They practically had like the best offseason they could have had, adding Jogamo. Moving on, with the final Americas team, we have 2Game Esports, which I think they're gonna be good. They're gonna be pretty good. I don't see them being a top contender for anything, but I think they're gonna be good. I think they're gonna be solid. I don't think they're gonna do much, but they're not gonna be bad. And looking at it, I mean, it's G2 in first, NRE second, Sentinels third, 100 Thieves fourth, Lev, Crew, MIBR 2G, EG, Loud, Furia, C9. So now we're at the final region in APAC. And what do I think of APAC? I don't know if it's just me just rating a lot of APAC teams really high, or if it's just that I genuinely feel like APAC has just made a lot of upgrades this year, meaning a lot of the teams in APAC just feel really good. As I do feel like this DFM team is just going to be good this year. Like, finally, I feel like we have a Japanese team which is actually going to be solid. And it's going to be exciting. Moving on to DRX, though. I mean, DRX is still DRX. Mako is still one of the best controllers in the world. Flashback looked solid last year. Bane Freeing Human is going to be okay. And probably pretty good. I just think this team is going to be pretty good. I don't think they're going to do much damage, but they're going to be pretty good. Gen.G, I just don't see them being a team that fumbles this year. Although I will say Foxy9 and Yeoman might overall, if we look at those two players and then look at Lakia and Meteor, probably a bit of a downgrade. But overall, though, this team is just great. This team is just gonna be good. I don't care what anybody says. HSK with Solo as the coaching staff, along with Karen, Yeoman, Texture, Foxy9, and Munchkin, is just gonna be a good roster. I don't care. It's just gonna be a good roster. Moving on to global esports, a roster that's never been good and still is not good. They basically changed every single player on the roster. I think Crystal is great, and I think they have some good pieces here. I just think the team does not look very put together. I mean, there's three Filipinian guys, and then there's Udotan, which is going to play, but one of the Filipinian guys is not going to play, and then there's a Russian guy, and then there's a Korean guy, and then there's there's just a lot going on with this team, and I don't really know what's happening. Moving on to Paper X. A bit of a hot take here as well, as I do have Jing and Forsaken at an 8, while Davai at a 9 and Forsaken at a 10. Or, sorry, Jing and something. Um, but yeah, also I have the team chemistry at a 9, just because I feel like, especially looking at the end of last year, I feel like you kind of saw Alex lose a bit of control in this team. Although I will say they have looked better in this preseason, I still feel like you can see that Alex is finding it difficult to find these extra small things to work for this team, like the small fundamental things to work. Maybe they will this year, but I don't know. It's going to be difficult, I think, for them to do that. Moving on to RRQ, or Rex Regum Queon. Keon, I don't know how you say it, but yes, RRQ. I think this roster is just genuinely good. This roster is just going to be good this year. There's just a lot of good players here. Cushy is on the weaker side, but Sphero, Jemkin, Monyet, Estrella, all great. They didn't really change much on the roster from last year. Just made some slight changes and just hope to continue improving over time. And I think that's kind of the right move for RQ, and they're going to be pretty solid this year. Probably fighting for champion spots. But there will be very fierce competition, as they also have T1 here, which added Boss Stacks and Meteor, which is a fucking stacked lineup. This team is the new Korean super team that T1 has always wanted to get, but never has managed to put together. So now I would say, officially now, there is definitely going to be 3 teams fighting for that throne in Korea. Although I will say DRX is looking like the least favorite to take that. Although, even though they've been the most favorite for a very long time, I do think that we actually have genuinely 3 Korean teams that all could potentially be the best. And a 4th wild card, actually, that we'll talk about a bit later, that is looking like they could even take it, which would be really fun if that happened. And we're going to talk about them in a bit. Moving on to Talon. Talon is... Oh, by the way, we are doing them in alphabetical order, except for the Ascension teams, which are gonna be last. But yeah, Talon didn't change anything from last year, which makes sense to me. This team improved so quickly at the end of last year when they got in Primi that I feel like now, with more time, this team is just going to be good. I do have some concerns with just the overall quality of the players, maybe not being as high as we think, and that they might have had a bit of a honeymoon. But overall, I just don't think this team is going to be bad ever. I think there is no way this team is going to be bad. Do I think there is a risk that this team isn't as good as they hope? Yes. Do I think there's a chance that this team is just going to be really fucking good? Yes. Moving on to Team Secret, I think that this team is very underrated. I think this team did somewhat of a similar thing to what Talon did last year. Although they didn't make champs like Talon did, I do think that they just had a really good ending of the year with the addition of Wild Oreo. At, like, I'm pretty sure it was stage 2 they added him. Yeah, stage 2. I feel like they just looked really good after that point, and sure, they lost 2-0 to Talon, but it was a close game. And I think they could just as much have won that. But yeah, I think this team is just going to be good. I think this team is going to be really good this year. And although there's a lot of teams that improved in Pacific, I think just simply the fact that this team is going to have the same roster and going to have had a lot of time to make things right in the roster, and then also on top of that, that this roster is just good. in general. Just means that I think this team is going to be good this year. Yeah. Moving on now, we have ZETA division, which sadly enough is probably the Japan team I don't have much hope for. I just don't see them being much better than they've been prior. And that's about it. I just don't see it, although they had a bit of a run in one of the off-season events. I'm pretty sure, right? They did have it Red Bull Homegrounds where they looked really good randomly. But overall, I just don't see it. And now we come to the team that is the Korean wildcard in Nongshim. As Nongshim Red Force was absolutely dominant. Obviously, their name was Simpresa Gaming, but then Nongshim got them instead. And well, this team is just ridiculous. Like, ridiculously good. Like, except for the finals, this team literally just dominated everything. And I think this team has potential to literally win a trophy this year. That's how good this team is going to be. And then moving on to Boom, the last team, Boom Esports, I think they're just going to be solid. I don't think they're going to be a bottom team, although they definitely could be a bottom team. I just don't think they will be because of how much they've just kept everything together and just have another season to reiterate on everything. I just don't think this team is going to be that bad, that they're one of the worst in the league. But yeah, going into the final rankings now, going into Pacific here. We have Gen.G, Apeks, T1, Team Secret, Talon, Nongshim, RRQ, DRX, DFM, Boom Esports, ZETA, and GE. The rating on DRX is gone, but it was an 88, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so that was it. I hope everybody enjoyed. This is going to be a long video, and it was. Thank you guys for watching. See you all in the next one. Bye.